The two novels which I will be discussing within the presentation is that of the Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep and Dorothy Porter's The Monkey Mask. Thus, I will be answering topic 2 from the assignment guide. An argument that I deem largely relevant to both the texts was selected from Rose Lucas's article called The Body Tracking, Sex and Crime in Dorothy Porter's The Monkey Mask. This argument being that although ostensibly structured around the narrative conventions of the crime fiction genre, The Monkey Mask emerges as much as a narrative of love and the tortured labyrinths of sexual desires as it is one of the solving a murder. This is an argument which I agree with and can be proved true through firstly establishing a number of hard-boiled crime conventions within both the texts, alongside an element of golden age crime evident within Porter's novel in particular. Secondly, I will also touch on the narrative of love and sexual desires that is present within both texts and which contribute to the text story as much as the crime conventions do. The Big Sleep is a story that takes place in the urban streets of Los Angeles, which is the first evident hard-boiled crime convention for this text. Another being that this text is based on and surrounded by organized crime and corruption, which moreover exposes explicit violence. For instance, it is obvious how common crime is within the society due to the fact that it is not unusual for a private investigator like Marlowe to be hired. Criminal acts are shown through the blackmail which General Sternwood receives at the beginning of the story, as well as the illegal pornography shop owned by Arthur Geiger. There are also a number of deaths that contribute to the crime in this novel, including the death of Sternwood's chauffeur through drowning in a car, the death of Joe Brody, Geiger, Harry Jones, and Eddie Mars's henchman, and Rusty Reagan by gunshots, as well as the attempted murder of Marlowe by General Sternwood's daughter, Carmen. It is also known for the hard-boiled crime genre to have a male detective which is pitted against a femme fatale, who is a sexually and deadly female who represents the face of social transgressions. Evidently, in The Big Sleep, the detective is a male named Philip Marlowe and is faced with Carmen and Vivian Sternwood, as well as the silverwig Mona Mars as the femme fatales that are pitted against him. In particular, it is the Sternwood sisters who use their sexuality through either kissing him, falling on him, or laying naked in his bed in order to distract Marlowe from his work, majority due to Carmen being the actual answer to his investigations. The Mona Mars is also a femme fatale, however does not seduce Marlowe like the sisters, and instead Marlowe himself is interested and attracted to her without prior lures. Saying this, Mars is still a deadly character within the plot who murders her former husband's henchman. Porter's novel can also be viewed as structured around the narrative conventions of the hard-boiled crime genre and also an element of the Golden Age genre. Porter's novel differs from Chandler's novel not only through the use of poetry as suspenseful narration, but also through having the protagonist detective not that of male, but a female who is pitted against a female fatale. The femme fatale within The Monkey's Mask is Diana Maitland, whom Jill shares an intimate relationship with after turning to her for help with solving the death of Mickey Norris. Diana would be considered one of the femme fatales in this novel, as alike attempts by the Sternwood sisters. She is not only sexually alluring, but she is also a prime suspect in the case. Another femme fatale of this novel would be Diana's husband, whom is also a large suspect in the case, that attempts to seduce Jill in order to distract her from discovering that he is the most likely killer. Thus, as the femme fatales are the proclaimed criminals in the story, the novel shows to uphold the criminal conventions of the detective being constantly tempted by the femme fatale, and also that the detective is largely involved with criminals. On top of this, the novel shows explicit violence, which is another hard-boiled crime convention. This violence is evident in association to Mickey's death, as the report of the death was rather gory, with her body found in several pieces and there being traces of bruises. Although there are evident crime conventions throughout both of the novels, there is also just the same amount of narration of love and the tortured labyrinths of sexual desires. In The Big Sleep, for example, what was expressed by the three femme fatales may not necessarily be described as love, however there was most definitely expressions of sexual interest. For example, whenever the Stonewood sisters, particularly Carmen, were described within the novel, they were either associated with the concept of sex through the way they looked, acted, or spoke. For instance, when Carmen was firstly introduced into the novel on pages 14 and 15, Marlowe described her flirtatious intentions through stating, "She lowered her lashes until they almost cuddled her cheek and slowly raised them again, like a theatre curtain. I was to get to know that trick. That was supposed to make me roll over on my back with all four paws in the air." This quote being a perfect example of how the conventions of crime within the novel is matched with the narration of love and sexual desires. This being, as it is clear Carmen has sexual intentions, yet Marlowe is resisting her temptations, supporting another convention of a hard-boiled crime story. Overall, as the sisters were not only constantly described to be acting or holding sexual traits, they were also the main characters within the novel, and thus the narration of love and sexual desires appears frequently throughout the novel. Alike The Big Sleep, The Monkey's Mask also goes to show that the novel is just as much about solving the murder as it is about love and sexual desires. The novel is based around the protagonist Jill and the experiences she encounters in her life. Thus, described are events involving her job as detective and her love life with Deanna and Nick, as they are current experiences within her life which show to influence her thoughts and actions. Largely due to the time of publications of the novel, The Monkey's Mask is a lot less about sexualizing and demonizing the women characters for having these traits, and instead shows more interest into the relationship a couple can hold because of these sexual experiences. Readers of Porter's novel have a much larger insight into Jill's relationship with Diana and the sexual experiences she encounters with Nick. This is largely due to the result of the first-person narration, where the reader feels welcomed into these relationships as Jill not only describes the events that take place, but also how she feels towards them. And as the relationship between Jill and Deanna becomes stronger and more important, the more Jill discusses them in the novel, and thus becomes just as much as part of the story as solving the crime. Overall, Porter's and Chandler's texts both support Lucas's compelling argument through demonstrating a crime fiction novel that shows elements of love and tortured labyrinths of sexual desires just as much as being about a case being solved. This is clearly shown through the number of hard-boiled conventions they both display, alongside the number of sexual relations within the story which interrupt this process of finding a killer.